multiple cars in the driveway. I was living at a place that it was phenomenal. I had like 270-degree views of Melbourne City. You know, I just had a great lifestyle. I spent money on clothes that I didn't need. I was miserable. But I think that in all things in business, I think it takes the humbleness of saying, I'm not expected to have the answer. I'm expected to go find it. I made a ton of money, don't get me wrong. That business at that time, oh my gosh, I lucked out. But also I didn't, because I wasn't doing something that was fulfilling for me. But for me, the world never worked for me. And instead of blaming it, how do I take responsibility for this problem? I understand it may not be my fault, but how does that help me? How does that serve me?
I'm excited to welcome Matthew Pollard to the Fired Up podcast.
Well, I'm ecstatic to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
You've got 5 multi-million-dollar success stories of your own, helped 3,500 plus business owners that were struggling to grow their business. The list goes on. So I thought it'd be great just to kind of start there and really understand why did you get into the coaching business and really take that entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, absolutely. The origin story is I shouldn't be the one coaching, I guess is the answer. I mean, my origin story really is, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader in late high school. I was super introverted, and I got diagnosed with this thing called Irlen syndrome, which, luckily enough, basically means I put on a pair of funny colored lenses, which didn't exactly help with the confidence, but I can miraculously, learn to read. Now, I couldn't read like everybody else. I could start the process of learning. So for the last 2 years of high school, I hustled like crazy just to get good enough grades. I got into the top 20% of my state, but my family realized, and I knew, I was exhausted. Like I didn't know what I wanted to do, and they knew I wouldn't stick it out. So we all agreed I was going to take a year off to find myself. And so I took a job at a real estate agency, and most people would expect me to say right now, I was the guy out selling. I wasn't. I was the guy in the back office doing data entry, look on my face like, don't speak to me. I'm here to find myself, right?
Right.
Well, 3 weeks into that job, I lost it because they shut down the office. So here I am, and this is Australia at Christmas time. So that's summer. So for those people, for your American audience, it ain't snowing. It's the best time of our year.
Right.
So people take, from the 20th of December to the 15th or 20th of January off. No one's hiring. And so the only jobs I could get were these things that in the paper called commission-only sales roles. But it was the only job I could get. My dad broke his back 80 hours a week supporting the family. I had to apply to them. Okay. Well, I applied to all 3 jobs that were in the paper. That was the only 3 jobs hiring. I got 3 job interviews. Then I got 3 job offers. And I'm like, wow, maybe they see something in me.
Sure.
I don't see myself. Well, I was wrong. I went in, I took a job selling business-to-business telecommunications. And I went in with this little bit of quiet confidence because all 3 people hired me. Well, my trainer put that to bed real quick. He's like, Matt, we hire everyone. We've got this saying, we just throw them up against the wall. We see what sticks.
Confidence just,
So it wasn't exactly that. I mean, he could have lied to me. It would have made me feel a little bit better, right?
Right.
But I get thrown on this road called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia, 5 days later after just 5 days product training. I mean, no sales training. I don't understand why. I think it's because people don't, the rules are you have to give them the product training, and then they're like, we'll just see how you go.
Yeah.
Like, why invest in you?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd like to think that's changed now, but it really hasn't in a lot of commission-only sales roles, unfortunately. But, I mean, there I was. I had no idea what to say. I walked into the first door, and people wonder why I say I luckily was politely told to leave. But shortly after I was sworn at, then I was told to get a real job, which was always my favorite.
Oh, I love that.
It was the only job I could get.
Sure.
So here I am, and door after door that just kept happening. And I got to my 93rd door, and I made my first sale. And I was ecstatic. I made like $70. And for me, that was a lot of money back then. But I then had this realization, I've got to do this again tomorrow. Yeah. And the next day and the next. And I'm not okay with this. I just, the whole idea was daunting. But I think that one of the things that kind of just people do is they're like, well, I just have to rely on lady luck, or, that's just the way it is. I either have the gift or I don't. And I just wasn't willing to accept that. So I decided to take responsibility, really, and say, well, what if there was another way? And for that, I had to realize that, the guess that I made at that time was that sales had to be a system. And I went to work just kind of learning the system. And, I had a reading speed of a 6th grade. I'm not exactly picking up Brian Tracy or his Zig Ziglar book. Grant Cardone wasn't available at that time. But,
sure.
When I got to YouTube, I typed in the word sales system and all these videos came up. And it blows me away that a lot of people don't go to YouTube for more
Sure,
advice.
why not? It's there, it's free, and
exactly
a lot of information.
Well, that's how I taught myself. Like, I'd spend 8 hours out in the field applying what I learned the night before. I would spend 8 hours practicing the next day. As soon as I finished my 8 hours in the field, like either working on what I the step that I was working on or the next one. Yeah. And then I spend 16 hours practicing every weekend. And I know, by the way, for the audience that's listening, this does not sound fun. I get it. And there are smarter ways these days, but that's all I could learn how to do. And back then there wasn't anywhere near as much it's available today. But I got better real quick. Like soon it was like 71 doors, then 43 doors, then 18, then
slowly
9.
Getting better and better, right?
Yeah, I got it down to making a sale every 3 doors.
That's fantastic.
And I mean, what was interesting was 6 weeks in, my manager pulls me aside. He had the same face that my real estate boss had when I was about to lose my job. And I'm like, have I done something wrong? Like I was the quiet guy that handed my paperwork downstairs. All the boisterous salespeople talking about, how they closed that deal, locked it in, and the market's getting harder. Yeah. I wasn't really involved, so I thought that I was doing something wrong because I wasn't really accepted by the community upstairs.
Right. And
he's like, we just got the national sales figures, which, back then it used to come out once a month, and we're kind of blown away by this, but you're the number 1 salesperson in the company, which just so happened to be the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. Okay. I mean, the whole thing took 6 weeks. Yeah. So, I mean, I say to people all the time, like, yes, it was a lot of work, and I don't think people have to do that amount of work now because there's so much out there to help. Right. But the truth is, I've carried that success my whole life. And yet most people, even if they did it over 6 months or even a year, my goodness. And I went from, terrified to sell to really, being the best in the business of that business. Right, the funny thing was, and this always makes me laugh, so he told me I was the best in the company. And he's like, so you can manage. I don't know why people think that, though. Right, yeah. Like, I mean, I had no idea.
Very different skills.
Yeah, he's like, no worries, just mud up against the wall. Give your team, see what sticks. Sure. Everybody quit. All of them. In 24 hours. But I went back to YouTube, learned to manage, got pretty good at it, got promoted about 7 times in the space of 12 months, and then started my own business. And fast forward just shy of a decade, I was responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. So,
fantastic. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I was definitely not the person that would... I mean, I actually think if I hadn't have lost my job at that real estate agency, I probably would still be happily doing some form of administrative role.
Sure.
And for those people that are in administrative roles, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to be an administrator role or be a writer or be a coder. Like, there are a lot of people that just want those quieter jobs or those creative roles. Sure. I couldn't imagine not doing what I do today. It was not, I'm not suggesting that this is the path for everyone, small business ownership, sales, or leadership, public speaking. What I'm saying is that I hid away from these things because I didn't know they were possible. And I believe that everybody needs to know that they're possible for them. Sure. And then they can choose whether they or not they want them.
Yeah, there's skills that you can learn, right? It's not something you're born into, like you were talking about introverts versus extroverts. Yeah. I think that, it's important to understand that it just takes work and it takes persistence. And you had to persist through a number of challenges, the biggest being not knowing what you didn't know at that time. So now, like you said, fast forward, you've raised multi-million-dollar businesses into the success that you have, and you've also helped other business owners with their own struggles. But as you grow, and we got introduced because of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and one of the criteria is that you do have a thriving business, right? $1 million or more in revenue, and so we realize that as businesses grow, you just inherit bigger problems. People have this misnomer that there's some magic to the success and then everything's fine and your business just runs on autopilot. But the truth is you just inherit different problems. So talk about the challenges as your business has grown that you've run into and how you've overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important if we look at the important learnings of my beginning story. I mean, yeah, sure, everything's a learnable skill. That's absolutely a great learning. And I think whether you apply that to sales, leadership, public speaking, any of those so-called extroverted arenas, but gosh, I mean, extroverts have their own burdens to bear, right? Sure. Some might say they're not the best listeners. Some might say they're not the most empathetic. Right. Those are all learnable skills also. Sure. And I guess the difference is that extroverts know they can learn those skills. And if they work for a global organization, the HR team will send them to learn those skills. Yeah. But everyone says, oh, poor Johnny, he's an introvert. He can't learn how to sell or can't learn to network. I think that, and by the way, for people listening, I mean, what I just said makes it easy for people to say, oh, that's it, I'll blame the corporations, I'll blame the way the world is. Right. I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is that for me, the world never worked for me. And instead of blaming it, and you saw me talk about storytelling, and I talk about the science of storytelling and how it short circuits the logical mind, you speak to the emotional mind. Well, if you're telling yourself these really theatrical masterpiece stories about why it's harder for you, then you're not looking for solutions. Sure. So for me, I always started from a place of, how do I take responsibility for this problem? I understand it may not be my fault, but how does that help me? how does that serve me? So I would really say, well, how can I take responsibility for this? How can I assume responsibility? And then I live in what if thinking, right? So I just spoke in Detroit, and that, obviously the home of Henry Ford, but he has this wonderful saying, if I think I can or if I think I can't, I'm right.
You're right.
And so for me, I lived in this what if thinking of what if there was another way? What if there was another way? As opposed to explaining why it's harder or why it's probably not possible.
Okay.
What if?
Right.
And that's how I discovered the sales system. And, quite easily, sales may not have been a system. Funnily enough, when I typed sales system into YouTube, I realized
right up. Yeah.
I wasn't the first person that had that idea, right?
Right.
But there's everyone's probably heard of the book The Secret. Like, okay, cool. Think of it. Believe it. Sure. Do the work. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. It was I took responsibility, I lived in what if, and I was willing to do the work. And I think that what I've learned, it's really interesting. I find that you're 100% right about businesses just getting bigger problems. And I actually think that the problems that you have as you're growing a bigger business, if you haven't had burdens when you start, you're actually really not well equipped to handle them.
Right.
Because you're not willing to... You don't emotionally regulate well. You don't accept the problem as your own because what do you mean the world's not working the way it's always supposed to for me?
Right.
And then you don't live in what if because the problem is that you're always naturally having... It's like the Michael Jordan story, right? Like the concept, like he wasn't naturally brilliant at basketball, but he just did the work and he got better. I actually think the people that have natural abilities and tend to be, especially in sales, right? The top 10% of all sales performers have a planned presentation. That's just the statistics. The bottom 80% just say whatever comes out of their mouth, right? Well, where do you expect the introverts sit at that? Right at the bottom. Extroverts, right at the top of the 80%. But in the top 10% echelon, a lot of introverts in that space.
Right.
And funnily enough, on the Global Gurus list of, top 30 sales professionals, which I'm honored to be on, and I thought I was the only introvert. Turns out most of them are introverted.
Most of them, okay.
Yeah, so it's... The thing is, I was the first one to outwardly put the word introvert, which I thought I was going to get slammed for, on my book and say introverts actually have the edge when it comes to sales.
Yeah.
But I think that in all things in business, I think it takes the humbleness of saying, I'm not expected to have the answer. I'm expected to go find it.
Right.
And I think that's always the rule set that I've had. And my team... I'm very open about my Achilles heels. I'm very open about the fact that if you call me after I've spoken at an event and after I've had a whole series of meetings, at my hotel room, I behave less like your boss and more like a tantruming 5-year-old. So please just understand that you have to, if it's urgent, you can call me, but ignore that. And I've done my best to emotionally regulate, and I'll apologize while I know that I'm not in the best place to answer the question. And a lot of times people will call me and I'll text them and I say, look, this is my downtime. Is this urgent? Just to remind them. And I've learned those sorts of things, but I take responsibility for the fact that I know I'm not in the best place. And because of that, it's not like I didn't love everything I just did. I love speaking. I love helping people. But I also know that there are times where I need to be more in control of myself and more mindful of the fact that I'm not in my best way to serve others. And because of that, I remove myself and I'll have downtime and I'll sit there and watch Netflix in the dark. And people are like, but that's a waste of time. It's 3:00 in the afternoon. I'm like, so what? Right? If I need to charge up, it's not, no one sets the times and schedules. Like, don't believe any rules. What you need to do is just say, how can I be my best self? How can I take responsibility for anything where I'm not my best self? And then can I learn systems and strategies? Because I found that after speaking at an event, I couldn't do meetings afterwards because I was not 100% emotionally centered.
Sure.
But then I learned how to manage my energy on stage so I was less anxious. And a lot of that is telling stories and learning stagecraft so you're less uncomfortable and not trying to lean into becoming an extrovert because that's not a path for success for us introverts. But then also understanding that there are lines because we have our battery. An extrovert just gets more and more charged. But try and get him to sit in a room and do work on a computer for a day.
Right. Not happening.
Again, we all have our burdens. We just have to learn how to compensate for those and also be honest with your team. Like if we have this force field, nothing's ever wrong, I'm invincible. Well, you're not going to succeed. You may get to 1 million. You're not going to get 1 million plus.
Right. And nobody's buying that 100% of the time, right? And if anything, it sort of puts the an uncomfortable pressure back on the other people. Like, why is this person always put together 100%, knows where they're going? I don't know if I always do. And, maybe I'm not enough in this job. And I think that it's inspiring to see the human side of a leader, and the fact that you're vulnerable enough to, and you understand that that's a part of who you are, and you can express that to people. Actually, I think it makes you a stronger leader than if you were to try to hide that or pretend that it's not there, because you point out that the downtime is important. It's actually part of your system, it sounds like, right? The difference between wasting time watching Netflix and using it as a source of recharge is that it was part of your plan. You knew that that was downtime so that you could be your best self on stage in front of the people that needed you to be 100% on. So you were doing it for a reason. It wasn't just mindless.
Yeah, you're 100% right on that. I mean, you saw me speak from stage, so you could probably speak to it, but I'm like a shot of adrenaline, I think. Like, absolutely. I am a supercharger.
I watched you come on. I'm like, how many Red Bulls does this guy have before he got on stage? Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. And like you had said, we didn't know the backstory at the time, that your flight had been delayed. You had all this, cross international travel. Is jet lag even a thing to you? I don't think it is, because it's like,
yes, it is. So things do affect me, and this is the thing. I'm not bulletproof.
No, I get it.
I'm just passionate.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. When you do something, and this is one of the things I say all the time, you can create a rapid growth business out of anything these days, but there's nothing worse than a rapid growth business with customers you don't like in a business you can't stand. And especially when I speak at small business groups, gosh, I love it. And it is a huge passion thing for me. So yeah, I mean, my flight was delayed 3.5 hours. I got into the hotel room. I think I got to sleep at like 1, and then I had to be, there super early. So it was, I was exhausted, until, firstly, an introvert, this is actually a real advantage. I still get nervous before I speak on stage. Yeah. So I do get this adrenaline rush that you extroverts don't get like I do, right? You're tired. For me, I'm like, I'm scared, excited. Yeah, okay. But then once I get on stage and I start sharing my story, I love doing it. So I get this huge amount of passion, energy. Great. And because of that, I can go all day on that. But that means that I also need to understand that I am going to hit a wall. So yes, I have to plan for it. But what I meant by, being that supercharger, I know I can do that purely on passion. Yeah. And I could do it without a night's sleep and still be fine. But if you don't plan for the come down, and if you set a really important meeting after, like for me, I know I can do back-to-back meetings. But if you give me an hour break and then ask me to do a meeting, not going to happen. Okay. Right? So I have to stay
in that energy,
Because, and I know that you need to give me 2 hours after doing, if it's 1 hour, not so much, maybe an hour. But if I do a half day like you saw me do, right, I need 2 hours to emotionally recharge. And I'm not saying my energy, like emotionally recharge is the right word.
Yeah.
But then after that, I'm back and I'm rock solid, right? And I know that, for me, I need to watch a silly show. Funnily enough, I need to watch a show I've watched often because I don't want to tolerate not enjoying it.
Okay, got it.
Right?
Yeah.
So I need to watch something like, there's TV shows like Scrubs or Boston Legal. And I know when the first 10 seconds happens, what it is, what's going to happen.
Sure.
And I need that predictability of, I know what's going to happen.
It's less mental energy, right?
Exactly. And, I know what happens in the show, but like for me, it's not about the show. Half the time I don't even remember watching the show. It's just about having that meditative almost state. Sure. But what I've learned is I can be that supercharger of energy, and that's not fake. Like a lot of extroverts will say, oh, do these big gestures. That's not me. I'm just passionate, and you can tell.
And I could. I mean, I joke about the Red Bull, but I could tell it was actually not from any other source, but your own. And the other thing that it seemed like, which was interesting, because you think introverts get their energy by that alone time, but you did connect genuinely with everybody. And you talk about in your book the types of people that we have givers, takers, and balance sheet makers, right? Yeah. I really saw you as a giver in that instance, even though you were doing a lot of the talking. You were giving of yourself, and you really weren't looking for a return based on that audience. It was just, how can I share? How can I help this group learn from the stories that you had and the stories of people that you've helped? I mean, talk about that when you build a team, because it seems like the system certainly helped you overcome some of these challenges, but also the team. How do you know that you've got the right people partnered with you when you look at the way that, different people are motivated and how you can align?
Yeah, absolutely. When you talk about the energy. I talk about, I actually have a presentation called Channel Your Superpower, and it's all about connecting with passion. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm not really passionate about what I do. It's just practical. I make great. That's never true, right? Because people could have done anything. They chose this, but usually it's because they're going too broad or they're not servicing their best type of clients, and they've bled into, I just need to do what's practical rather than I need to do what I'm passionate about, which always ends up making you more money because you have the extra access to that energy source.
Right.
And so the first thing that I need to make sure people are aligned with my passion and mission. That's like the number one criteria. Like, I can teach anything. I can't get people to be excited about what I'm excited about.
Sure.
And so for me, the passion, the mission, like organizations have like mission statements, and I think they're dry and boring. So I always suggest, like, for especially, I mean, when you're talking about a business that's under 100 million, there's still a strong leader, and it's in a lot of ways a personal brand driving an organization forward. And whether or not it's a company brand with a visionary leader that's driving a whole bunch of people internally, or whether it's a face of the brand driving it, it doesn't matter, right? When you're talking about your internal team, there's a face to that brand.
Sure.
And so the thing that what I learned, when I speak on stage, when I'm leading a team, it's never about me. Right? I mean, it's the number one rule of networking, which is weird because everyone's like, oh, I got to talk about myself. No, you don't. Right? When you're networking, you don't want to talk about yourself. When you're leading, it's not about you. When you're speaking from stage, it's not about you. And I find that when you get up on stage and make it all about you, it's exhausting because it's anxiety riddled. But if you just get on stage and you are honestly trying to help everybody in the audience, it actually gives you energy because you feel like you're at service, and the anxiety dissipates. You know, I interviewed Ryan Dice, who founded Traffic and Conversion Summit, and, you know, huge event. And he said, like, every time I was worried about how people perceive me, I could barely get on stage. But then, you know, when I started to think about the fact that these people needed to hear what I had to say, and I made it all about them, he said I never got scared. And I mean, you think about, like, when I interviewed him on the Introvert's Edge podcast, he's so introverted that he won't get on stage unless there's a back entrance. He doesn't want to walk off the stage.
Really? Okay.
He's just scared of being trampled.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing, but it just is what it is.
Interesting.
So from a leadership perspective, it's the same thing. It's never about me, but it's always about the mission. Not about them, not about me, but about the mission. Now, I need to be focused on helping them get past whatever they're struggling with, but it's all about helping and serving the mission. So one of the things that I always recommend people do, and, you know, I talk about this from a networking perspective or a sales perspective, but it applies to an organization globally. And I say this is the secret document you hand to your team. It's not something you publicly make available, like a mission statement perhaps you put on the wall. But basically what I suggest from a mantra perspective is you say, here's my unified message. And that's obviously something that's unique IP. We can talk about it if you like. But then I say, here is the niche that I serve. Now, a niche can be an industry. It can be an outcome, a problem that people have. And there's lots of variance to that. But then you say, here is why it's congruent with me. You can talk about your unique skills, your unique upbringing, your unique talents. And as a larger organization, you talk about your unique core competencies. But then what I get people to suggest is write down what you love to see. The people that you work with in that niche, what's the desired end state? And then what do you hate to see? And what does it look like for them in their life if they don't get to work with you? And then I go to the next piece, which is, you know, why is your ideal clients going to rally to your cause? And I get them to write down, and this, in a lot of ways, I call this the empathetic introvert, right? Because introverts have empathy. For extroverts, a lot of times they have to interview their clients to understand it a little bit more. But I talk about what's going on in the daily life of your client, and, you know, what's keeping them up at night, what's bouncing them out of bed in the morning, what are they mentally struggling with, all of the things that are going on. And people are like, oh, business. And I'm like, no, like, they're taking this stuff home. How is it affecting their relationship with their wife and their kids? How is, you know, did they miss their kid's dance recital because so-and-so didn't show up on Friday or whatever, and maybe their daughter's not speaking to them, right? So how, like, that's what I'm really looking at. And then and then the last question is, what makes you the only logical choice for your ideal demographic? And what's interesting is people write a whole bunch of vanilla rubbish the first time they write it. And I'm like, this could apply to any business. Sure. And it could apply to anyone. Get really specific on your specific niche and get really specific on what's going on in their unique life. And the answer is a lot of times they don't know. And I'm like, well, that's why you're not selling to them. And that's why you struggle to get people emboldened to work in your team. And that's why you've got terrible retention, because people these days can get paid to work anywhere. They want to feel like they're part of something.
Right.
And when they feel like they're part of something, they're willing to accept perhaps a needy introvert, after a big speaking event, because they're like, okay, he did something that's important to our mission.
Yeah.
We're going to let him pause. We'll handle this for him until he's ready to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important because they connect better with the mission, but they also connect better to you because they know the whole person. And if you give them that insight, then they kind of understand where you're coming from. Whereas if you're trying to just be this persona, it's hard to connect with that. If the mission is sort of, you're trying to be all things to all people, which we talked about it, you can't, right? Then you're not anything for anybody. Yeah. And so that is a great insight to building a team and getting people to rally around you and your mission. So as you've grown and built successful teams, successful businesses, and helped others, I'm sure there's things along the way that if you had them to do again, maybe it was a misstep that you could have done differently. You're better informed now, right? You're more. Is there anything that sticks out that's a lesson learned that if you had it to do again, you'd do it differently?
Oh, absolutely. So my first business was a telecommunications company. I mean, I'd sold telecommunications. Of course, I moved into communications. It was all I knew, but I still had this, everyone sees me as the slow kid. I've got something to prove mentality.
Okay.
And I would say, I safely could say I wasted 3 years of my life on that business. I mean, I made a ton of money, don't get me wrong. It was that business at that time, oh my gosh, I lucked out, I would say. But also I didn't, because I wasn't doing something that was fulfilling for me, right? I've always found that the closer I get to helping the individual, great. I mean, call rates, don't get me wrong, I convinced myself, deluded myself that $1 saved is $10 made, right? Whatever. Truthfully, if somebody said me, told me about call rates and sat me down, like, I won't do my own telecommunications plan now, just because I loathe telecommunications. Okay, yeah. But the thing is that I built that business purely to prove to everybody that I was worthy, I think is the right thing. And in 2007, I won the Melbourne Young Achiever Award, which, I mean, is a pretty significant award. And I remember, like, it should have been the paramount, like, capstone thing that kind of said, I mean, I had multiple cars in the driveway. I was living at a place that, I mean, it was phenomenal. I had like 270-degree views of Melbourne City. Like, I just had a great lifestyle. I spent money on clothes that I didn't need. Like, just, doing I've for the first time got money. Yeah. Right. And by the way, I don't do any of those things now. Like, none of those things are important. But I remember going home, sitting on, not my balcony, but kind of like my view of the city. I was miserable. I realized that I'd done everything for everyone else. And yes, I was making a lot of money, but Jim Carrey kind of talks about this. I wish everyone had the opportunity to be rich to realize how insignificant it actually is. Right. And it's the same as like the people that drop their business to go and start an entrepreneurial venture because that's the dream. No, it's not. The dream is to run a business that revolves around you, your family, and your life, not the other way around, where you're doing something you're passionate about. Right. Any business is not the answer because usually it's the wrong business. And usually because you're not passionate about it, you don't make the money that you deserve because you're not willing to you don't put as much energy into it as somebody that's passionate, so you don't get paid well, and you also market yourself terribly. So, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of passionate people that market themselves terribly too, but at least they've got the energy once it's working. Right. But the thing is that in 2007, I remember saying, enough now, right? I've done enough to prove to other people, and truthfully, I shouldn't have done it in the first place. Now I'm just going to do what fills me. And I know that a lot of people probably listening are going to say, yes, but you had the money at that point to make that decision. I really believe that I could have made money doing anything. I didn't need to choose telecommunications. There was fear because telecommunications was all I knew. Yeah. And there was more than that, a relentless push to prove everyone wrong. And I guess if anyone's in that situation, they should know that relentless pursuit it gets you nowhere. I mean, yes, it might get you money in the bank, but you could do that doing 1,000 other things. Yeah. It is the most unsoul enriching path for anyone, and I just don't recommend it.
Yeah, and that's really great advice. I mean, it's one thing to have a chip on your shoulder and try to prove what you know you can become, but if you're not doing it for you, if you're not doing things that really get your passions behind the mission, it's going to be hard to stay in that and have the persistence like you have I think it's important for people to realize that you know, the material success, the outward success. By the way, I love that speech by Jim Carrey. I've seen the whole thing, and I feel like that it's something we overlook. We see the outward signs of material wealth and success and think, that's what I want. That's what I'm trying to achieve. And it really isn't. There's an inner pull that you should be listening to. And it sounds like you have. So, I mean, I read off a list of recognitions and accolades before we started here, and you've talked about them as well. So there's certainly, you could take your pick, but really for you, what are you most proud of to this point?
That's a good question. I think two things, if I'm allowed to share two.
Yeah, absolutely.
One's quick. I mean, I love the fact, that book that you have in your hand and the prequel have sold, you know, just over 100,000 copies now. They're in 16 languages. And I mean, I'm a guy that couldn't read and write. So, you know, having that kind of achievement to have impacted so many people's lives, you know, especially in a medium that isn't my natural, amazing. Ecstatic to have done that. I think if I was to think about the number one thing that I'm probably really proud of is actually changing the way that people network totally. Just because, I mean, yes, I built a bunch of really successful business in Australia. When I came to the US, I made the decision that I wanted to be a business coach, which in truth basically means that you have to sell yourself, not an external product, which, I mean, how do you not take rejection personally when it's you? Right. But I remember, like, the first time that, I mean, I wasn't even networking. I was like, we just moved into an apartment complex. Like, I just moved to the United States. We were trying to find a house. Yeah. And I met this guy that worked at a gym. Like, he wasn't working at a gym, he owned a gym. For 20 minutes, he told me about how much he loved his gym and, like, all the reasons for why he likes people getting healthy and whatnot. And then, like, he turned around and he's like, what do you do? And I was totally unprepared. Like, I knew that I wanted to help introverted service-based business owners. Yeah. Like, I think there's something heroic about a person with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to start a business of their own, especially if they're introverted and they feel like the cards are stacked against them. Right. But I hadn't really thought of how I wanted to communicate that yet. And I remember saying, I still regret this, I said I was a sales coach. And he looked at me like I was one step above a scam artist. And I was like, I couldn't take the words back. Yeah. And he started, you could tell he'd had a bad experience with a sales coach in the past. Sure. And I didn't have to guess, he told me pretty quickly. Okay. And I started defending and talked about the 93 doors before my sale and all the things that I do differently. And it was like I was trying to convince him. I wasn't even trying to get a sale. I was trying to make a friend. Like, it was weird, and I just found it was disgusting. It just felt yuck. And so, funnily enough, I ruminated on this. Like, I never ruminated about door-to-door sales. Like, and by the way, for those introverts that ruminate, like, it can be used in a continuous improvement place, right? So I used to, like, ruminate, but in a continuous improvement way. How can I do that better? It's not about the system, not the sale. Sure. But I ruminated about this in a negative way, and I was like, I hated that. So I was like, I'm never calling myself a sales coach again because people clearly don't like that. Right. So I remember going to a networking event and I went, I'll say I'm a marketing coach. And the first person responded, you're a marketing. I need marketing. How much do you cost? And I'm like, dude, we just met. Like, right. And then I would remember the next person. It was like, I already have someone in marketing. Okay. Like, what do I say there? I've got magic ruby slippers. Like, I'm different. Like, I mean, I felt like everything felt contrived. So I went back to YouTube to try and find some form of ideology that would allow me to do it differently because, I mean, there had to be something, right? Yeah. The best I could find was an elevator pitch, which is I do this for this group of people, even if. It sounded so contrived. And like, almost like, you know, I'm just trying to think of a good example. I'm a sales and marketing coach for introverted service-based business owners that feel like the cards are stacked against them or that feel like they're terrible at sales. Yeah. Horrible. Right. For me, it sounds like, you know, I love to work with you because I'm trying to buy a new car, and if I got you as a client, I'd be able to buy it. Thank you. Yeah. So I was like, I have to change this. And then I came up with this concept called the unified message because I believe that everybody has natural skills, gifts, talents, beliefs that perfectly qualify them to, yes, help a demographic of people, their niche, but with a specific outcome. And what I realized is that everybody defines what they do by their functional skill. And how is that okay? Like, it's like, yes, you're a 10X coach, but you are so much more than that, right? You are a life of experience, every book you've ever read. And what I find is that most people want to put it in a nice bow, and people appreciate that because they're like, I already have that. Thank you. I don't need you. Discarded. So I started calling myself the rapid growth guy. And people, it was like it gave them an aneurysm. It was like, what is that?
What is that? Yeah,
so, of course,
right.
I'd be interested before I was trying to be interesting. And then they would say, what, Matt, I can't believe I've been speaking to you for 20 minutes. What is it that you do? And I would say, I'm the rapid growth guy. Just like I said, I'm an accountant, full stop. And people would fall over themselves. And they'd be like, what is that? And for two reasons, right? One is our brain needs to neatly put things in a box, and we want to know what to do with it. We can't not solve that puzzle.
Yeah.
But secondly, because I built so much rapport with them, and I was interested in them, they wanted to be interested back.
Yeah.
So it was like this double concoction. And what I found then, of course, everyone's expecting me to then say, I'm in sales and marketing and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Horrible. What I would respond with was, well, one of the things I love to see more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service provider with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to start a business of their own. But what I find more often than not, and I hate seeing this, is they generally get stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, really feeling like people only care about one thing, price. And then I would ask them if they knew anyone like that. Well, of course, if you've done your research, I never go to a networking event where I haven't connected with people in advance.
Yeah.
And so they feel like more like planned meetings.
Sure.
But then they would say, I'm like that. What a surprise.
Yeah.
I met with them before, right? I profiled them.
Right, you knew
and
that.
I would say, well, I'm on a mission to help introverted service-based business owners like yourself realize you're not a second-class citizen. Your path to success is just different. What you need to do, though, is instead of focusing on your functional skill, you just need to focus on three things outside the scope of your functional skill that allow you to build a business that revolves around you, your family, and your life, not the other way around.
Right.
Actually, let me give you an example, and then I'll tell you a story.
Perfect. Yeah.
What's the difference? I didn't mention what I do at all. It was more about who I want to serve, the
Right.
passion that I have for
Right.
helping the world. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud of, because I feel that nobody, extroverts included, hate networking because they feel that it's so transactional.
Yeah.
Which is why they tend to move into like aimless networking, where somebody will ask you what you do for a living. You're like, well, my day job's this, because you don't want to be promotional. And no one wants to talk to someone who's like they're not even that interested.
Right.
And what I find is the unified message combined with the passion and mission statement and then leading into a story, it's like this powerful concoction that just, it overwhelms everyone, because no one's ever experienced that. Like,
Right,
even if they're not
right.
your ideal client, they're like, oh my God, I love what you've said.
Yes.
I need to introduce you to so-and-so.
Right, yeah. And it is powerful, and it's a great concept. I think you also have talked about a couple of different ways to put it into action, which is amazing. It's helpful. And I learned a lot from your discussion yesterday. I've learned a lot from just us talking here today. So I think it's definitely something to be proud of. You've impacted so many people. So I got to ask, Matthew, like, what's next for you?
Well, there's a new book coming out,
Okay.
but I can't release the name of it just yet. My publisher has got me hush.
All right.
But I will say that for me, what's interesting? A lot of people will say, what's next?
Yeah.
I love what I do, and more of this is the honest answer. So, I feel like people are always on an endless pursuit to do more. I mean, yeah, of course, my whole team got given the task of using AI to replace themselves. I promised all of them that I wouldn't fire them. So yes, we want to be more efficient, but we just want to help more people. And, so I speak at a lot of events, I coach and consult, I have an online program. And a lot of people feel like they need to create the next product, the next thing, because their businesses aren't profitable, or to get the next level of growth, because they've got a vanilla message, they need to have something new and exciting. Okay. The truth is I don't. When you have, and this is the thing I talk about in my networking book, like the whole book, the preface is, let me show you how to master the networking room so you never have to go back to one. Because the truth is, if you can't articulate the value of what you provide when somebody's politely listening to you in a networking room, you have no chance online.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
I mean, that's why I hated the concept of online, because to me it was like, take a photo of your donut or your dog for something to say. And then I realized it was because everybody was trying to be the loudest. Like, I'm still here. I have nothing relevant to say, but I'm still here.
Right.
And I just felt that if I could be super on point, then I didn't have to work so hard. Yeah. And so for me, I've had the same online program for 7.5 years. And it still helps people. I haven't created another one. Yes, we've created little micro courses for different needs.
Sure. Continue to develop it. Right.
Exactly. We've got a platform called Introvert where I also have like my new invisible sales method for just salespeople that want, just a sales process.
Yeah.
And mainly because I hate the way sales works these days. Yeah. Like, I'm so glad we could meet today. Tell me a bit about your business. Yeah, sure. I'd love to. After checking out my website, what questions do you have? Oh, I've done the research. I'm actually just lying.
Right.
And so I teach people how to structure that to show that you've done your research, because a lot of people have. They just they just don't articulate it, and so they get the halo effect of those bad salespeople. So yes, I do have little trainings and things that I do, but what for me, what's next is really just about and this is why the new book's so important. While I can't give away the title, the preface is very much about, there are a lot of people that really embrace Susan Cain's Quiet book, and I think it empowered a whole generation of introverts, which I love. Yeah. And I will say that it's not a counterpoint book, but it's, a lot of people read it, and even though Susan Cain outwardly said that she was a negotiator, which is pretty much an extrovert arena, right? Or so-called, I would say.
Sure.
She was good at it. And yet people feel like they can't negotiate as an introvert. And yet they read the book and they went, I'm an empowered writer, I'm an empowered this and I'm empowered that. Yeah. My book's pretty much going to be on the concept of, look, I get it. We're empowered, we're quiet, great. Yeah. But I'm not that quiet. I'm concise, I'm directional. But the thing that I want people to believe is, yes, if you want to be a writer, be a writer. If you want to be a coder, be whatever you want to be.
Yeah.
And those so-called extroverted arenas are not out of touch or out of reach for you. And that's what the new book is really about. It's about helping people confront that reality really head on, that they need to not do these activities, but know that they can and then choose.
Sure. Sounds like you're telling them to be true to their unified message.
Yeah, I mean, in my world, success in all these so-called extroverted arenas is not about becoming more extroverted, because to me that's a ticket to inauthenticity and exhaustion. It's about leaning into your introverted strengths. Right. But the thing that I find is people either try to become more extroverted or they tell themselves they can't. And actually I put this on a slide. So often people, they convince themselves they can't before they've ever dedicated enough time to really find out. Yeah. And I'm not saying that they need to. I'm saying, like, a lot of people, and by the way, the used car salespeople totally stole sales. Like, the definition of sales is really derived from the original Scandinavian term to serve. To serve. I'm always good with serving people. I don't want to be a salesperson either. Right. So firstly, you have to get past the delusion that sales is a dirty word, but you also then need to decide if that's what you want to do. Sure. And for a lot of people that are under-degree qualified, sales is a wonderful place where you can earn a huge amount of money. And I mean, the world of entrepreneurship is too now, but both of those things kind of feel out of reach for introverts. And again, I'm not saying people should want that. I'm just saying that they should decide after they're fully informed.
That's great. It's really important to make sure that people align with that and their purpose and their message. And you've done that great. So I really appreciate your insights here. You've given me a lot to really understand and take as, someone who identifies really more as an introvert than anything else, but I've used it in a way that allows me to still connect with people more genuinely. I love the unified message. I really appreciate you bringing that here and introducing it to the group. So thank you so much for your time today. This has been excellent.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.